In this video, I'm going to teach you how to create an equity research model like heck yeah! Hey, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Sarah. I'm a CFA charter holder. I have an MBA in quant finance, and I used to work in equity research at Lehman Brothers. I make weekly videos on the subject of portfolio management careers. So please subscribe, stay a while, and things may just get wild. Today's video is about the subject of how to create an equity research model. This has been per request of many of you. I'm not sure if you're going for an interview. Comment below and let me know. Are you in the interview process already? Are you looking to get interviews? Are you already working in portfolio management? Would love to meet you. Say hello in the comments. Now, if you don't know what an equity research model is, I would love for you to just click below and download the free sample models that are available to you in the link in the summary box. I made these for all of you, and I'm going to be discussing these models during this video. So before we move on, I'd love for you to just click and download. There are some Excel models there, and then there's also a write-up in Microsoft Word, an equity research report sample. So now, let's get into it. The first thing I want you to keep in mind when you're creating your equity research models is you want to cover a company that you somewhat know something about. So maybe you used to work in healthcare, and so you have some kind of close knowledge of how the industry works. Maybe you live down the street from a manufacturing plant of a certain kind of aerospace part or something like that. You always want to keep in mind that there are a lot of people going for these jobs, and if you really want to have that edge and be competitive, you are going to need to have some kind of a differentiator or a differentiated brand, so to speak, of you as an analyst. So the more that you can make this personal or close to you, the better it will be. Not always possible, but it could just even be something that you're obsessed with or interested in. It could be like a real strong interest that you have, because then even you'll have higher knowledge than a lot of people that, you know, what you don't want is you don't want these to just be a set of numbers in an Excel model. You don't just want it to be a factual exercise. You want this to be something where you have intuition and you have strength of mind, so that can really separate you, because like I said, you're going to need it because these are super duper competitive types of jobs. So now the other thing is I want you to think about the company itself before you get started on the model. Understand its business and its workflow. What's happening in the industry? What is the competition? What are the valuation ratios and the metrics that people typically use to describe this industry? For example, if you're valuing a food company, these companies sell perishable items, so they're going to likely be using FIFO, first in, first out, for their accounting, all right? All of these are things that have to all make sense, and it really can get quite nuanced. So just take a little bit of time and understand what the company's workflow is like before you jump into the models. So now I'm going to actually show you a sample of the actual models that you would create once you've done steps 1 and 2. So now, here they are. Okay, so here is a sample model. Now, I just want to be very clear that this is not a valid model anymore. You can see this goes back to 2012. Don't use this as an actual recommendation. This is just for illustrative purposes. But what you can see here is that in these models, what I've done is I've taken and I've broken out their historical balance sheet figures. So this is actual. A means actual. There is 2007, 2008, 2009, and 2010 actual numbers. And then when it gets to the more recent years, I actually didn't do it here, but you would want to break it out by quarter. I do this on the other ones, I'll show you, but you want to break it out by quarter once you get into the more recent years. And that's because you're probably going to be looking at the more recent performance more granularly. So it's good to have those numbers broken out. Now you could record it back, and you're just copying these things out of the company's financial statements. You could record it by quarter, quarter by quarter for all of the years that you're analyzing. That actually might be the better way to go if you have the time to do it. That way, if you're trying to make a historical comparison of the current year to 5 years prior, if you don't have that number in your model, it's going to be a pain, because then you're going to have to just go in and put it anyways. So I would suggest putting in the quarterly data for as long as you can possibly stand to do it. It's going to make the model more granular, and that generally is a little bit better for comparison purposes. So when you put them in though, you can hide them here using this hide feature in Excel, and I would strongly suggest that you do that. So I just wanted to take a minute and ask, are you finding this video to be useful? Because if so, I would really love it for you to give my video a thumbs up. That will help me to assess whether or not this is a good type of video for me to make for you in the future. So, you know, for me, I like a nice clean model. I don't like things disorganized and all over the place. I also don't like to have to scroll or page over too much. So that's just going to make it a nice little compact model, works really well. Now, I put the actual numbers from the financials. I just copied them right out. And then down here, I actually put the ratios. So you can see these ratios are they're referring back to the antecedent cells, which are B7 and C7 for that particular calculation. You know, if you're not sure about how to program formulas in Excel, then you need to open up some Excel tutorials. There are, I'm sure, tons of them, and get acquainted with how these basic formulas work. But you're definitely going to need to use Excel to create the ratios and the analysis. So it goes back just plugging in the data. It's not just static data. Okay, you're going to have to do a lot of different things with these models. But you can see I've mapped out some of these balance sheet ratios, long-term debt to equity ratio, net debt ratio, etc., that I feel are relevant to companies of this type. So that's the balance sheet. There's also the income statement. And again, here I'm projecting out for the estimates, and then these are the actuals. So I have my actual income statement data, and then below I'm going to put my ratios. I hope you're following along in the models. Did you download the models yet? If not, the link is in the summary box below. These are free models that I created for you, so don't be shy. Go ahead and just download them. Now, here's the cash flow statement, same thing. You've got the company data, and then you've got the metrics after it, nice and neat and clean, not too cluttered. Now, what you also might want to do is to create a sheet for any of the accents kind of features, like if you feel sales is important, if their sales projections are not going to be typical in the future, and you really want to get in depth with it, then you want to create a sheet especially for that. You know, in this case, I've mapped this out for sales. It's also a good idea to download the historical price data. I have this month by month. I loaded this, I believe, from Yahoo Finance. Depends on what kind of an analysis you're doing. Sometimes price movements are important, for example, in technical analysis. So it depends, but I just think it's always good to have a historical record of the month-end price for the security for the last several years. And so I also wanted to show you here that this is a sample equity research report. You should have a short write-up, and especially where you're interviewing, you want to be able to explain your ideas really clearly. So this is just a basic report. Again, I hope you click the link to download, but here you've got a summary of what the company does, the reasons to buy it, the growth drivers, the risks, and then of course the sources of information. You always have to have integrity, include any sources that you use. So don't make it too long. Remember that no one has time to sit around reading like a 10-page report. I would just make it 1 or 2 pages long. The last thing is map out a sheet with the competitors. You can put like whatever ratios you're looking at, and this will be useful when we get into the comparison and analysis part, which I'm going to discuss next. So the next part, after you input all the data, the next step is to actually go forth and to start your analysis. So a key part, and what you're what's really going to be critical to your skill as an analyst is creating the assumptions. Anybody can just copy out the data, but as an analyst, you're going to be, and if you're getting the job, what you're going to be getting paid to do is to make a vision of the future based on what you think the expectations are or should be for the company. So that's where it's really critical. You've got to look here at all of these different, like you can assess historically what the key ratios are and the assumptions, and get some numbers for that, like tax rate, interest rate, whatever, like margins. And then these are going to be mapped into your model. So for example, gas purchased for sale for this company. There's an assumption, so commodity inflation rate, that's going to be called in the model to create what the estimate is. So that's where your assumptions really have to be on point. Now, you might want to revise the assumptions up or down from their historical numbers. You want to look at what's happening in the industry. For example, if there's a growth in margin, if a company is reducing their cost of goods sold, that may mean good things for the gross margin going forward. That would be where, instead of just using the historical rate, you adjust and project forward with a different higher margin rate in that instance that I mentioned. So the first thing about your analysis is the assumptions. The assumptions are really critical. The second thing is going to be what the actual ratios are that you pick. So when you do the valuation of the company, you want to create, you might want to use like the dividend discount model if it's a stable kind of a company and they're paying dividends. You might want to use free cash flow to equity if it's also a stable company but not paying dividends. Okay, so there's different ratios that you could use. Those are an absolute, like the dividend discount model is an absolute. It's coming up with an absolute value. There's also relative valuation, which is the price equity ratio. It's, you know, assessing the price versus the earnings to assess if the company is cheap or expensive. Now, price earnings ratio is not always useful if the company doesn't have earnings or they're not stable. So again, this is where it's going to be really critical that you find the right ratios. And so if you have questions about that, you want to look at companies of its type. You could look on Seeking Alpha, which is a free website where a lot of analysts put up reports. You want to look at what the other analysts are using as the ratios and then assess whether or not you think it makes sense to do the same, similar, or different. So lastly, the last step is that you want to make sure that you are staying up with the company. So you can catch the company earnings call recording, you can get Google alerts, you can just stay up with the news that's happening on the company, but at least on a quarterly basis, you want to be refreshing and brushing up on these models. And especially if you're in the interview stage where you're talking to companies and trying to get a job in portfolio management, you want to really be looking not just at the company, but you also want to be looking at the economics impacting the company. What are the key macroeconomic variables? You want to be up on those as well. Interest rates, inflation, you know, if you're working on like a shipping company, like the, you know, maritime, right? Like commodity inflation, really important. You know, banks make interest margin. What's happening with interest rates? All of these things. So it's not just company-specific data. If you're going for an interview, you also have to be aware of what is happening with the macroeconomic variables as well. So that is my advice about how to create an equity research model like heck yeah. I hope that you've downloaded the models by now. If not, please click the link in the summary box and do so. And I would love to have you subscribed here. I make weekly videos, like I said, and so please subscribe and we will see you next week.